Okay, so I have now officially seen most of the bigger found footage horror type movies that they've done in recent years. Starting with kind of the one that really started the whole genre, which is the Blair Witch Project. I've also seen Diary of the Dead. I watched that all the way through. Um, Blair Witch Project I kind of watched intermittently just because it really wasn't doing a whole lot for me. Um, I've seen Cloverfield, which was a really big budget version of it, and I also watched Apollo 18, which was a semi big budget version where they had to do a lot of staging scenes on the moon, um, which then sent a lot of conspiracy freaks um, you know flying out the door. I've also seen Lunopolis, which also discusses the moon, but supposedly takes place in an alternate timeline, kind of on the line of Donnie Darko, where the end result of the protagonists in the story result in that timeline being undone and a new uh, timeline that we live in being, you know, now in existence. So, I mean, and I'm trying to approach these with an open mind, from the perspective of just a moviegoer. Um, in most of the cases, they try and give you a lot of jump scares where somebody just kind of startles you. And that would be okay, except that that's not really necessarily very good writing or even acting. Um, Even when they pull back to show something really amazing from a first person sort of perspective, which is kind of the point, um, they're providing spectacle, but they aren't really providing a very interesting character development. The characters usually always die in the end. So contrasting that just in terms of the cinematography style, the way in which they film it, um, it has this sort of secondary element to it that you have to think about, and that is this. Um, in terms of the shaky camera, I've seen it done in other movies. In one case, it was done simply with that method, and that was The Hurt Locker, which was done all in handheld camera format, so the camera was very shaky as a result. Um, the other versions of this sort of handheld, hand-operated camera style were actually done on the TV series Firefly and in Star Wars Episode 2. So, and actually, the people on Firefly were kind of the first ones to really do it. Um, they just didn't get their series out there until after Star Wars Episode 2 had already come out with it, where um, the the computer animators were doing this with Lucas, simply where he let them go wild, and Joss Whedon's um, Mutant Enemy production company, uh, they let the CGI artists go wild too. They just said, just wow us and everything. And so they did the tight zoom with the blur and then the focusing in on what was to be seen and all the different things there. And so they're allowing the artists to kind of take uh, ownership a little bit of what they do, um, and have a little bit more input into it than just uh, what the writers do. Now you contrast that with these found footage ones where there isn't as much creative control by the computer artists. Um, that are doing all of these effects. The appeal of the found footage film, like Quarantine or any of these movies, is that they are incredibly cheap to produce and shoot, because instead of needing expensive camera equipment, you can buy over-the-counter camera equipment, and you can buy it wholesale, which allows you to have a lower production cost, which was part of the beauty of why the Blair Witch movie made as much money as it did. The other benefit to the sort of found footage first-person perspective movie is, you know how it's going to end. It's going to end with them presumably dying. They're not going to make it out. But more importantly, you're able to cut down the number of people in your cast. There's an old rule that, even if you are seen on camera, if you aren't speaking, you generally don't get paid, you don't get credited, you just get Screen Actors Guild scale rate, or daily rate for Screen Actors Guild. And so obviously there's a little bit of an issue with that. The other advantage is that you don't have to hire big name actors necessarily to be in the films, and that's one of the big deals, is that what is it, Devil Inside was another one. All of these different movies that are done this way, they do little cheap things where they'll have an orchestra burst right in the middle of the film when there's a jump scare, just to kind of emphasize it if there's not a lot of noise with it. And they emphasize all the different scares that you can have with it. And I mean, it's kind of fun because it's as if you're there in the moment with them, but at the same time, it's not really always the best way to go about it. I think that there are better ways, like with the Paranormal Activity movies. Those are another example of found footage where it's not handheld. Those are actually usually cameras pre-set up. Sometimes they are handheld, but they do have cameras in fixed positions as well, doing time-lapse and things like that. I have issues with these because they rely less on good writing, less on good lines, and just kind of on storyboarding, basically. If you can make up a decent storyboard with some visuals, the lines don't matter, and you can have the actors, basically acting it out as if they were really in it, just kind of improvising, as long as the actors know what they're supposed to be doing. And that's basically the whole premise of these found footage films when they have people directing them. These directors who do them don't strike me as particularly bold, exciting, or visionary. Their writing does not expand the medium or the public consciousness. It doesn't broaden the viewer's awareness. It doesn't give the viewer insight into themselves, society. It doesn't offer anything deeper than what is on the surface. It just kind of takes whatever is popular, whatever people want to imagine is happening, and it just kind of gives it to you right there. Any mystery is usually revealed very quickly. For instance, I watched Apollo 18 pretty much from beginning to end. I paused it occasionally, and I didn't think it was that interesting. I was at a point in the story where, they were trying to figure things out, and I said, hold on, these astronauts are supposed to be our best and brightest, and they can't figure out that maybe the samples they brought on board are suspicious and not what they want. Plus, you have to also take into account this idea. The whole premise of Apollo 18 kind of revolves around there being life forms on the moon, and these could be life forms that were deposited there or that maybe evolved there. If they evolved there, that raises even further questions because the moon is not a hospitable place for life. There is no air to speak of, no water, so the organisms could not, if they are organisms or if they're more along the single-celled, but even they would basically have to be crystalline based. So they would have to be kind of silicon based, which is the other element that they figure life might be made out of if it exists anywhere else. They have yet, as far as I know, to find any crystalline based life forms, but silicon crystalline based life forms, but they have found that crystals do exhibit patterns that could become more complex and eventually develop into a life form not unlike an organism. And we don't exactly know what kind of forms that life could take, whether it would be kind of a moving, walking crystal thing or some kind of weird blob thing like on Star Trek. This is an old theory. So they don't exactly explore that. At one point, one of the astronauts smashes it with a hammer, and it shatters into a gajillion pieces like it's a crystal, which leads you to think, okay, well, it must be silicon-based. And yet it has legs that kind of extend out. And when it's wanting, but that's when it's not wanting to hide. When it's crawling around, it basically looks like an insect, which of course is creepy, and it's like, oh, insect creepy, right? Okay, I get that. But it's supposed to be some kind of crystalline creature that's an insect or spider-like creature as well. Okay. But that also doesn't explain its hostility. I understand that, it seems to communicate over radio waves through the story. It's kind of shown that these creatures interfere with radio signals. And so, okay, that would make a certain amount of sense. If these creatures were to communicate a different way, they might communicate through radio waves, which are very high intensity. They might also communicate through heat. And this is if they were like in an air environment, vibration, sound waves. That would also be possible. But then why would they be hostile necessarily? Because they don't just destroy things that send out radio signals, but they seem actually hostile towards the astronauts that go up there. So, I mean, it doesn't really bother to answer any questions. It just says, oh, well, the Department of Defense is sending them up there to die so that they can observe what's happening. And, why? Well, because we're mysterious and spooky and altogether ooky. And that's their reason why. They don't have a reason. So right away I'm insulted as a person in the audience watching this movie because they don't have any reason to really do this. You know, if they wanted to get one of these samples, they could say, you know, instead of putting the samples in, like, I don't know, a plastic bag, we're going to have you put the samples in a really strong box. And then at the end they suggest um, that they gave moon rocks to world leaders as a way um, of, like, I don't know, like maybe the moon rocks were actually the alien organisms, and the alien organisms somehow um, took over the world leaders' brains that they were given to, or something. Like maybe the moon creatures had some kind of means of affecting mind control, which is just, it's a weird notion. They kind of show that it happens with one of the astronauts. I read about the plot before I watched it, and I completely forgot what it said on Wikipedia about the plot, but I didn't think it was that interesting, obviously. And then I watch, and one of the astronauts is about to get away, and it's like, oh, of course, he's the other astronaut who supposedly was dragged off to his death is right outside, and he's possessed by the creatures, and he's wanting to stop his friend from leaving. And of course, then they do the cheesy reveal where it's like, oh, of course he's not going to get away, because they have him suddenly stop accelerating from the moon, and suddenly everything floats up, including a couple of rocks, which then sprout legs, and oh, it's the monsters. And at that point it's like, okay, yeah, we get it. They don't get away. And then how they got this film, presumably from the moon, doesn't make sense, because if they crashed while in lunar orbit, then the material from the pods would crash back down on the moon. It wouldn't fall to Earth or anything, so then they would have to have sent another mission to collect the film, and then they would run the risk of getting contaminated as well. If there was a risk of contamination, or people were already contaminated or influenced by the moon creatures, why would why would the Department of Defense then not want them coming back if the Department of Defense was already under the influence of the moon creatures? So it's a whole big plot hole that doesn't exactly make sense. Or if they know that this is a threat, why not send them up there with the information they need or the equipment they need and say, so listen guys, you're doing this on the down low, you're doing this secretly, right? Okay, well, what you need to know is there are creatures on the moon. They look like rocks, but they're not rocks. They tend to attack people. We want to study them. So we're going to have you guys pick up some samples. We're going to have you put them in a real strong box in the lunar module, and hopefully none of them will get out. If they do, then there may be trouble, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Meantime, watch out for anything unusual happening, because they might cause trouble if they do get out. So be careful. We don't know what they'll do to you. Lock them up tight, and then get them safely back to Earth, and we'll study them, and that's that. That would make sense. That is what I would expect the Department of Defense to do if they were sending astronauts to the moon for uh, like the 7th time or something. I guess it would be the 8th time. Anyway, so my basic point is, the film doesn't make sense right away. And that's kind of my problem. Cloverfield doesn't make a lot of sense. At what point would some person not turn off the camera? The guy is jumping from the side of one building onto the roof of one that has fallen over. And he says, if, you find this, then I'm dead. And it's like, well, no crap. So, why would he, not turn off his camera at that point and then turn it back on once they were in? Plus, how much battery life does this camera have? On top of that, and I watched it, almost through to the end. I kind of had to go do something else because I was really insulted as an audience member when the guy doesn't run when this giant monster is standing over him. Giant monster standing over you, and you don't start running? It looks down at you, and you don't start running? I mean, admittedly, we aren't exactly used to having giant monsters standing over us, but this guy has been recording this monster storming through New York for a few hours now. You would think that the surprise would have worn off and the guy would know to run. And it just goes on like this. All of these different movies kind of follow that same approach where it's all that way. And I just find it such lazy writing, on the filmmaker's part to incorporate these strange elements that they think are so clever when they really aren't necessarily. I don't like the fact that they have to have all the characters die. The characters don't learn anything, they don't gain anything from the experience, they just all die. And so it's just a down ending, everything just ends badly for them because it does. And it happens every time. And people still shell out money to go and see it. And I'm just like, why? You know how it's going to end. They all die. It's all scary, and they have a bunch of things jumping out at you from the dark, or things lying there still, and then suddenly, boo, ah. I mean, okay, I can appreciate, the primal feeling of like, oh yeah, scary, good. But at a certain point, you have to kind of question whether or not they're just doing it to basically give you everything you've seen before. But, same stuff, different monster. Or same stuff, not even a different monster. It just is, attacking a different person. And, I get a little tired of it. I get tired of seeing the same stuff offered every time. Now you compare that to some of the other stuff in other genres that they're doing. And I'm not making this comparison for the sake of for the sake of argument or anything else, but let's just say that that you had a couple of comedy writers from back in the 90s on a very edgy sketch show that lasted a couple seasons, and then they went ahead and made um, a very original script, a very original story, with a lot of comedy elements that appealed to adults and kids alike. And they were actually able to get a sequel out of it as well because it was so popular. And it managed to be a somewhat original story in both films, where the character was different from the beginning to the end, and it actually pushed the genre forward a little bit. And it told a good story that you could appreciate on different levels as a kid or an adult. And you could watch the film time and time again and notice different things every time. Now, the example I'm thinking of is Night at the Museum. Now, I did not expect that movie to be any good. Back when I first saw it, I was on an airplane, and I was amazed at how funny it was. I watched Freedom Writers, and I thought that film was predictable. Teacher comes into the ghetto, changes things. You know, focuses on the kids, focuses on bringing the best out of them, does a lot of good. Alright, great. Fun story, but I've heard it before. Stand and Deliver, Lean on Me, Dangerous Minds, and so on. It's an old story, and unfortunately it doesn't do a lot for the state of our educational system because you still have a bunch of budget-minded bureaucrats behind the wheel. But besides that, Night at the Museum was written by a couple of guys who actually went to the museum back when they were filming the sketch comedy show The State. These guys went on to do the show Reno 911, and Thomas Lennon and Robert Ben Garant are a couple of very innovative comedy writers, and they were able to involve a lot of very interesting things into the story based on stuff that they saw in this museum. They were able to, which is a free attraction. It's donation. It's a suggested donation, rather. So if you want to check it out, you don't have to pay in New York. It's an actual free attraction, which is really cool. The Museum of Natural History in New York, which I like. The Cleveland Museum of Art is very much the same way, and it's an amazing museum. But their business went way up after Night at the Museum came out, and a lot of the things that were at the museum in Night at the Museum were also there. And so there was an appreciation for an actual place. And from there, they said, well, what if something cool happened? And in this case, they had a fantastical MacGuffin. The mysterious thing that everyone wants that drives the plot forward. In this case, it's the golden tablet of, I forget his name, Akhmun-Ra? Yeah. So, and it's the same MacGuffin for the sequel, but it works because they have it do something else, as well as bringing the museum exhibits to life. I like that. I thought the movie was surprisingly good. It had a lot of good actors in an ensemble cast, as well as some really great leading people. I thought the celebrity cameos from the three old Night Guards, Dick Van Dyke, Mickey Rooney, and I forget the name of the third guy, but I've seen him in stuff and he's great. I'm terrible with names, so anyway. But, I watched it and I was like, this is a surprisingly good film. It's well made, it's well written, the jokes and the timing are punchy. There aren't negative things that are necessarily imitatable. I mean, a monkey slapping, okay, but I think that the ones that the kids probably imitated from that movie more were Gum Gum Dum Dum, and then I know that they imitated from the second movie the Boom Boom Firepower Thinker thing. You know, I think that's great, because that is a film that doesn't necessarily involve violence, doesn't necessarily involve sexism, doesn't necessarily involve, um, groin kicks and pratfalls and a whole bunch of stupid stuff, but it appeals to a broader audience, and it pushes the boundary of a family film to being something that adults can enjoy as well. And it has a simple enough story, but it has some subtle elements to it, some twists. It it has the character bringing the best out of himself when everyone else thinks that he's just a schmuck. And I think that's a great lesson out of things. That even if you are working a humble job that doesn't necessarily have a lot going for it or for you, it it can bring out the best in you and make you into a better person. And you can be serving a greater purpose in that job just in being the best you. I think that's a great lesson for people. I think it's a great lesson for kids, adults, and it teaches the importance of loving your child and having your child love and respect you. So I think that element to the story is better. It gives a better message. It has the same spectacle in that you are drawn in. It has the same amount of special effects pushed, but the writing is punchy enough that you aren't feeling like you're going through the same thing as you did before. The acting and the writing all work together. The cast work well together, and they think through enough things ahead of time that instead of just having everything storyboarded, they have a few different ideas as to the way that they could take things, and it's all a matter of working these things out, both in how you approach it and in how you implement it and how it comes off. So, with all of that taken into consideration, there's a far, far more intellectual approach taken to the filmmaking of a children and family movie than there are to found footage films. And that's kind of where I draw the distinction. That's where I take objection as an audience member. If I can find more to enjoy in a children and family film than in a cheaply made horror movie, then I'm not necessarily enjoying it that much. I got a lot out of the Evil Dead trilogy because there was so much written into it. There was so much care put into it. Yes, it was a bit of a cheap film in Evil Dead 1 made by some college students, but it had a lot of thought and care put into it. The second one was even better because it had a lot of care put into it. They bothered to do the slapstick and the comedy and the hilarity, as well as the scares. And so there was just so much to it. And there was just so much to enjoy. So, I can't tell you what necessarily makes a good film, but there are elements there that, when you bring them together, make for a better film to watch overall. And in this way, found footage films, in my opinion, are a fad, and they are quickly dying out as a trend in the filmmaking industry. They make a little bit of money by putting you in the dark and going boo, and that's about it. I grew up in an old house. I have walked through dangerous parts of town. Believe me, there are far scarier things to be frightened of in this world than necessarily what they can put on celluloid videotape or digital medium with any amount of CGI put in. And of course, the scariest creature that you can encounter, in my opinion, is another human being who is more than willing to do you harm. But that's for another video. All in all, if you like found footage films, I will say go ahead, enjoy them. And I hope that this video hasn't ruined your enjoyment of them. You know, don't let my babbling affect how you enjoy something that, brings a lot of fun into your life. But at the same time, if you want to enjoy something better, or if you want to think about maybe why you enjoy it and see if there's see if it's helping or hindering you in any way, then that's something you need to think about. Because sometimes things we enjoy aren't necessarily good for us. Found footage films are kind of the junk food of films, in my opinion. And if you like candy or junk food, then, that can be okay. Personally, I prefer a piece of fresh fruit, some fresh vegetables, something along those lines. In terms of both my diet and in terms of what I like in a film. I like it if it gets me thinking, or stirs me emotionally, or has things that I enjoy but don't put negative ideas in my head. And that's the big thing, is it shouldn't influence you to become a worse person, sort of like how reality TV and found footage films do, because those are basically along the same lines. They aren't reality, but they pretend to be reality, and that's the problem. So then when you're out in the world, you are perceiving the world through that kind of filter, if that makes sense. It affects how you perceive things in a negative way. Alright, so that's the end of my rant. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Bye-bye.